Hey everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I want to share with you how you can mask out a shape border. Now, Monday I made a card and I made a nice white border that was a rectangle around it, and that's very easy to do with painter's tape. But today I wanted to share with you how I made a circle border around a shaped circle card. The first thing I needed to do was make my actual circle card base. So I just took a piece of cardstock, folded it in half. Now I want to place this on my die cutting machine on the cutting plate. I want the fold at the top, and then I'm going to hang that die off the top. So I don't want it to cut all the way through. Now hanging that off just a little bit so you can see a little bit between the fold and the top of the die. That's just going to allow me to not cut that, and then it stays attached together. So you have a nice folding card base that you don't have to do any gluing or anything like that. It's a lot easier to do it that way than to glue two pieces of cardstock together. Now I also need to go ahead and cut out one circle. This is the die I use to cut my card base with, and I am just cutting out a plain white cardstock circle. I'm also going to be using that same die and then one that is 2 steps smaller than it, and I will inset that into that larger circle die, and this is going to cut out a border. Now you do want to be a little bit careful here and take your time and line them up. It is a little tricky to get your dies just right so they make a nice almost straight circle and you don't have one side that's a little bigger than the other, so just take your time. And then I always use some painter's tape. You could use washi tape, whatever you have on hand, just to hold that in place as you run it through your die cutting machine. I'll go ahead and put on my top cutting plate and run that through, and then I am left with my card base. I've got not only my little border, I have the inset as well. And what would be really easy here is just to inlay these two dies, but I wanted to create the effect of a one-layer card. So what I decided to do is this. The first thing I want to start out with is my main circle die. This is going to end up being attached to the card base because I want a full circle look. I don't want that little, even though I use the circle die to create my card base, it does leave a little bit of a flat top. So this is going to attach to the front of my card and just cover that up. It is a little bit much, so if you think that that is too much and too much work, you could by all means stamp on just the front of your card as well. So I'm starting off with that first circle, and I am using the brand new 2 Paper Divas stamp set. This is the neighborhood number 2, and it coordinates with their neighborhood stamp set, the first one. So if you have that one, great. If not, everything's 25% off in the store right now because unfortunately they are closing the store. So no more new stamp sets. However, right now everything's 25% off, so get everything you want while it's so cheap. So I went ahead and stamped that little house down, and then right underneath that I'm going to stamp the sentiment "Congratulations on your new home." And I do have somebody that is going to be buying a house soon, so I'm just preparing for that for this card. Now I'm going to color this house in with some alcohol markers. Now the kick here is I'm not going to be doing any blending or shading. I am using one straight color for each one of my little sections on this house. So for the windows, I'm using a very light blue. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on to coloring in the rest of the house. And I'm going to show you how I get by with just using one color. You do have to color on a few layers, but it only takes about 2, especially if you're using darker colors. You really want to add that second layer, and you can get by with just using one color, which is so nice. Another great color to use on the windows is also yellow. It gives the appearance of lights on the inside, so if you've ever seen me do that, that's the effect I go for when I use the yellow, but I decided to use a light blue today. So for the actual house, I'm only going to be using one color, and that is this very dark blue that I'm using here. It's almost a teal blue, I guess you could say, but I only want to use this color. I don't want to add any shading. So what I first need to do is get one layer of this color down. Now this stamp that I'm using here, this house, has some very straight lines in it, so it's very easy to just rotate my cardstock around, go around each one of the little images that's going to have this color around it and really outline that. And then I'll go back in now and fill in all those little white spaces. Now this marker has a tendency to bleed out on me, so I need to set this aside to dry before I go back in with another layer, and I'm going to move on to the roof. I'm using a brown color for the roof, and again I'm just twisting the cardstock so my marker is in the best position possible to get the straightest lines. I'm also going to use a very dark maroon color for that little chimney, and then I can go back in with my dark brown for the door. And then I use just a little bit of yellow for that handle on the door. And it's very small so you can barely see it in the video. But now that I've given that blue layer some time to dry, I can come back in and put another layer of this same blue color on. Now you want to move a little bit quickly here because you want to keep going over areas while they are wet. So if you stop in the middle of this and you come back in, you might have a little bit of those lines. So if you want to get rid of those nice little streaky lines, you need to keep moving and keep coloring while the marker is wet on the paper. Now this is a great place to really customize a card for the recipient or for yourself. So if you know the color of the person's house that they've bought, or you're putting a "we've moved" card out, if you've moved yourself, you can customize this to fit the person's house that they bought or that you've bought. And that is just a great way to really customize the card for the recipient or for yourself. And it's an easy way as well. I mean, what's more easy than just choosing some colors that coordinate with the house itself? And it takes the thought out of the color choices. So I also went over that door again as well as the roof, and then I'm coming back in with that blue just to push out any little mistakes I had. The lighter color will push out that darker blue and correct any of my mistakes. There you can see the finished little colored house, and it is ready to go. So I wanted to go ahead and mask off a white border. So I'm using that little border that I cut out beforehand in rubber cement. But first I want to mask off this house. I don't want to put any distress ink over the house itself, so it needs to be covered up. Now I am using white cardstock today to mask this off. I just simply stamped it down with some black ink, trimmed it out. This was very, very quick to trim out and fussy cut. Then I just put some rubber cement on the back, and I will place it down onto the one I had colored previously. This will just take up a little bit of that color you put down. It will show up on the rubber cement, but you can't tell on the actual colored piece. Now I want to put down this white border that I die cut. And all I'm doing is putting on that rubber cement on the back of it. I'm using the brush that it comes with, and you don't want to goop this up. You want a nice thin layer, but with a nice thin layer of this you need to move quickly because it dries quickly. But if you use too much, it's going to goop out on you, and then you'll be left with some white spots and it won't be a nice crisp border. So just do a thin layer and work a little quickly here. Once I had all of my masks in place, I set it aside to dry. Again, it takes about a minute, if that, for this rubber cement to dry. Now I want to put down a little scene. So I am using the inside of that frame that I cut. This is the circle from the inside of it. And I am just using this as my mask for the hill. So I'll first put it down, and I also, on a scrap piece of cardstock, I went over the top of that with a pencil and then just used some long blade scissors to quickly trim that out, and that's going to allow me to cover up my sky and distress ink in my hill. So that's just a really quick way to make some masks yourself. So I'm using peacock feathers for the sky. I used some very warm tones for my house, so I want to continue with using warm tones on the sky and also on the hill as well. So I'm not using my normal mowed lawn and salty ocean. I decided to go with more warmer colors for the sky and hill. So I want this very intense because I really want that white border to show up nice and white and really crisp. So I'm just really sponging on that color, really building it up. And while this distress ink is wet, it moves around pretty easily, so if you do get any little harsh lines, it's very easy to blend those out while it's wet. Once I had on my peacock feathers, I moved on to crushed olive. Now this is where that little second mask that I made comes in. I'm just going to simply cover up that sky that I inked up. And I want to put this mask down just right above that blue line. Now, whenever you put it right above there, not exactly on it, you don't have that little white space in between the hill and the sky. So if you put it down right where the blue ends and then shift it up just a little bit, you're going to have a nice flow from sky to ground. And it really looks a lot better than having that little white space in between the two. Now again, I wanted some really intense color here, so I'm going to go to town and sponging this up and really build up that color, really put it down thick. I want very, very intense colors here so the border shows up nice and crisp and white. Now once I had all this inked up, you might want to wash your hands because, as you know, Distress ink gets a little messy, but then you can peel up all your masks. Now all you need to do is peel this up. That rubber cement isn't a permanent. As far as I know, it's not permanent. It's never stuck permanent for me. I can always pull it up. So I just pull it up very easily I pull up this border very easily from the circle cardstock. And then I can also pull up that house mask as well. Now you do want to be careful because, as you know, Distress ink is messy. So just try not to, get any smudges on the white border because it will show up, since it is so stark white, against the harsh colors of the sky and the hill. Now sometimes it does leave the rubber cement does leave a little bit of a residue behind. I'm just using a cloth. It doesn't look clean, but I promise it is. This is just what I use to clean off my stamps. But I just use it to rub away any little residue that's left over. Now, I didn't have any trouble this time, but if you do have any trouble with your rubber cement smooshing out and you don't get a nice crisp border, you can use that Fantastics tool that I just showed, dip it in your Distress ink, and then that will fill in any little white spaces you might have where your Distress ink didn't quite get up to like the little house stamp, and that's just a great way to fill in those white spaces. Now to put this card together, I am starting with the circle card base, and I am putting down some double-sided adhesive on this. This is the thin paper that tears very easily. Now I just continued to go around in a circle with this. I didn't tear it, and this is going to allow me not only to really stick down that panel on there, and it's not going to leave any gaps, but I can just pull up that backing paper in one quick swoop and just use your bone folder to really press that down into the paper, and it comes off so easily. Once I had the backing paper off, I want to make sure that I put this on my card base straight. There's nothing worse than going through all the trouble of making this so perfect and really putting in all the effort and then putting it on the card base crooked. So I use my grid mat that's behind me there to really line this up, make sure it's nice and straight, and then press that down. Now this card is almost done, but if I were to try to stand it up now, it would roll all over the place. So I need to open this up, and on the back panel of my card base, I just need to cut off a little bit. Make sure it's nice and straight. You don't want it to be wonky whenever it sits up. And then chop off the bottom portion of that circle, and that finishes off the card. Now once I stand it up, it will stand up nice and straight and won't roll around on me. That finishes off today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you give this technique a try as well. As always, I will leave you with just these few pictures. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog, craftingwhilecaffeinated.wordpress.com. The link is in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!